A couple of years ago, I was trying to do a kind of fill-in for one of my programs at the center. The first half was a monologue, a comedy piece for a woman, and I felt I had to add something to make it a full evening. So I just tried out doing some pieces of Shakespeare and talking to the audience about what it meant to me and what the difference was between his prose and his verse, and the kind of technique that he uses that you need to get in touch with in order to make it clear. And out of that grew a sort of a one-man version of chatting to the audience about Shakespeare and demonstrating how to do it and how not to do it. Because I find that today, well, it's probably been true all the time, that you often get directors who impose so much visual stuff that the text gets lost, and partly the text gets lost because a lot of actors don't have the skill to do it. And directors either don't have the time or the knowledge to help them, and so they try to compensate with visual stuff, which is not really, I think the essence of Shakespeare is in the language, and that should be predominant. That should be the predominant thing. So I'm starting with a famous play of his, Antony and Cleopatra. The character who comes on first and tells us about Antony and Cleopatra, a guy called Philo, and he's never seen again. I mean, I'm sure the actor was seen again. The actor, poor devil, was probably playing 8 or 9 parts, but the actual character never shows up. He's just put in there to start us. So this is, he comes on and he's talking, and this is another thing that Shakespeare does very frequently because of the open air stage. He often had 2 characters coming on and in the middle of a conversation. We don't know what they said before they came on, but we immediately realize that they're in the middle of a conversation. So this is what happens. Nay, but this dotage of our general o'erflows the measure. Those his goodly eyes that o'er the files and musters of the war have glowed like plated Mars, now bend, now turn the office and devotion of their view upon a tawny front. His captain's heart, which in the scuffles of great fights hath burst the buckles on his breast, reneges all temper, and is become the bellows and the fan, to cool a gypsy's lust. So we know what the Romans think of Cleopatra. I was fortunate enough as a young man, some time ago, to see Laurence Olivier in his first stage production of this part. And I well remember, and I've never forgotten, the entrance before he made the speech. And again, he was a guy who broke a lot of rules. One of the rules he always broke was acting with your back to the audience, which is, you know, in the amateur world, that's an absolute no-no. You must always face front. But Sir Laurence, no, he did something else. So I'll show you how he did it. He came on, upstage left, came through a door which opened onto the stage like that, and he had this hump on the back as Richard III, and so he opens the door and he stepped onto what's called the downstage foot, which is what you never do. You always enter on the upstage foot so that you're visible immediately. So he did exactly the opposite. He did this, and then he closed the door. And then he went across the stage with the lame foot, etc. And he got to about the middle of the stage. And then he turned and looked at the audience. And then he shuffled down towards us. Very dramatic. And again, I believe, some directors don't agree with me, But I believe that Shakespeare wrote a lot of stuff for the actor to speak directly to his audience. And I'm sure this is one of them. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this sun of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. But I, that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking glass, I that am rudely stamped, and want love's majesty to strut before a wanton ambling nymph, I that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated of feature by dissembling nature, deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world scarce half made up, and that so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I halt by them. Why, I, in this weak, piping time of peace, have no delight to pass away the time, unless to spy my shadow in the sun, and descant on mine own deformity. And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain. Now, in my mind, an equal villain to Richard III is Iago and Othello. And again, I find the opening something that interests me. Again, we had two guys coming on in the middle of a conversation. Roderigo says, "Tush, never tell me, I take it much unkindly that thou, Iago, who has had my purse as if the strings were thine, should know of this. 'Sblood, you'll not hear me. If ever I did dream of such a matter, abhor me. Thou toldst me thou didst hold him in thy hate. Despise me if I do not. 3 great ones of the city in personal suit to make me his lieutenant off cap to him, and by the faith of man I know my price, I am worth no worse a place. But he, as loving his own pride and purposes, evades them with a bombast circumstance, horribly stuffed with epithets of war, and in conclusion none suits my mediators. For, certes, says he, I have already chose my officer. And what was he? Forsooth, a great arithmetician, one Michael Cassio, a Florentine, a fellow almost damned in a fair wife, that never set a squadron in the field, nor the division of a battle knows more than a spinster. Unless the bookish theoric wherein the togaed consuls can propose as masterly as he, mere prattle without practice is all his soldiership. But he, sir, had the election, and I, whom his eyes have seen the proof at Rhodes, at Cyprus, and on other grounds, Christian and heathen, must be believed and calmed by debitor and creditor. This countercaster, he in good time must his lieutenant be, and I, God bless the mark, his moorship's ancient. I think if you're a beginner and you want to do Shakespeare, well, first of all, if there are words in the text you don't understand, I think it's important to find out what they mean. But I think it's also important not to just leave it at that. I think the key to Shakespeare is finding out how he's phrasing something. For instance, if he says one sentence in one line, that's one thing, and that's easy to do. But sometimes his sentences, which are an extension of one thought, go on for 4 or 5 lines. And as an actor, you must acknowledge that. You must do that. If you break up one sentence of 4 lines into 4 separate sentences, the audience won't understand what you're talking about, because they can only hear the thing, and it doesn't work then. So it's very important, and his phrasing changes all the time. His rhythm changes all the time. And I think it's a matter of familiarity. I mean, I think I would advise somebody to take one scene, one character, and work just solidly on a very short piece, and then try and get some examples both in recording and movies of that one scene, and see how it differs from what you're doing, and see if what somebody else is doing is helpful. Because in the old days, you know, before the invention of drama schools, way back in the 19th century, young actors learned by watching the older actors, by being employed as people who would run on as a messenger with one line. And it would take them 4 or 5 years before they were allowed to perform bigger parts. So one learned by example, and you can do the same thing yourself. And but like I said, it's also helpful to go to somebody who's experienced in doing it and asking them to look at what you're doing, and they can be helpful. I remember one young fellow, you know, who he came to me, he did an audition piece from Shakespeare, and why he chose it I don't know, because it was a very difficult piece to do. And I didn't understand a word he was saying, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. It took me a little while, but I realized what was really wrong was he was playing at a great speed, and it meant nothing. And when I began to slow him down, it started to work. But he needed somebody to tell him that. And now, one of my favorite plays, King Henry V. Based on some truth, but widely changed for dramatic purposes by William Shakespeare. And again, the opening of the play, he talks to the audience. And again, we have a character called Chorus, but he actually shows up 2 or 3 times every now and again and puts us right on what's going on. Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Then should the warlike Harry like himself assume the port of Mars, and at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment. But pardon, gentles all, the flat, unraised spirits that have dared on this unworthy scaffold to bring forth so great an object. Can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? Or may we cram within this wooden O the very casques that did affright the air at Agincourt? Oh, pardon. Since a crooked figure may attest in little place a million, and let us, ciphers to this great accompt, on your imaginary forces work. Suppose within the girdle of these walls are now confined 2 mighty monarchies, whose high upreared and abutting fronts the perilous narrow ocean parts asunder. Piece out our imperfections with your thoughts. Into 1,000 parts divide one man, and make imaginary puissance. Think when we talk of horses that you see them, printing their proud hoofs in the receiving earth, for 'tis your thoughts that now must deck our kings, carry them here and there, jumping o'er times, turning the accomplishment of many years into an hourglass. For the which supply, admit me, chorus to this history, who prologue like your humble patience pray, kindly to hear, gently to judge our play. And then King Henry, who has been mulling over the idea of making war on France to recover what he regards as his rightful territory that was taken away, has consulted the church about it, and the church says, yes, it's a righteous war, go ahead. In the meantime, in order to prevent war, he's asked the King of France to relinquish the throne and let him move into France, take over the stuff without any battle. However, the reply comes back from not the king himself, the Dauphin, the heir to the throne, and the king says, call in the messengers sent from the Dauphin. And then the ambassador from France comes in and he says, may it please your majesty to give us leave freely to render what we have in charge, or shall we sparingly show you far off the Dauphin's meaning and our embassy? And Henry says, we are no tyrant, but a Christian king. Therefore, with frank and with uncurbed plainness, tell us the Dauphin's mind. Thus, then, in few, your highness, lately sending into France, did claim some certain dukedoms in the right of your great predecessor, King Edward III. In answer of which claim, the prince, our master, says that you savour too much of your youth, and bids you be advised. There's naught in France that can with a nimble galliard one. You cannot revel into dukedoms there. He therefore sends you, meeter for your spirit, this ton of treasure, and in lieu of this, desires you let the dukedoms that you claim hear no more of you. Thus the Dauphin speaks. And the king says, what treasures, uncle? And the Duke of Exeter opens the case. Tennis balls, my liege. We are glad the Dauphin is so pleasant with us. His present and your pains we thank you for. When we have matched our rackets to these balls, we will in France, by God's grace, play a set shall strike his father's crown into the hazard. Tell him he hath made a match with such a wrangler, that all the courts of France will be disturbed with chases. And we understand him well, how he comes o'er us with our wilder days, not measuring what use we made of them. We never valued this poor seat of England, and therefore, living hence, did give ourselves to barbarous license, as 'tis ever common that men are merriest when they are from home. But tell the Dauphin, I will keep my state, be like a king, and show my sail of greatness, when I do rouse me in my throne of France. For that I have laid by my majesty and plodded like a man for working days, but I will rise there with so full a glory that I will dazzle all the eyes of France, yes, strike the Dauphin blind to look at me, and tell the pleasant prince, this mock of his hath turned his balls to gunstones, and his soul shall stand sore charged for the wasteful vengeance that shall fly with them. For many a thousand widows shall this his mock out of their dear husbands, mock mothers from their sons, mock castles down, and some are yet ungotten and unborn that shall have cause to curse the Dauphin's scorn. But this lies all within the will of God, to whom I do appeal, and in whose name tell you the Dauphin I am coming on, to venge me as I may, and to put forth my rightful hand in a well-hallowed cause. So, get you hence in peace, and tell the Dauphin, his jest will savour but of shallow wit, when thousands weep more than did laugh at it. Convey them with self-conduct. Fare you well. So there's a scene here where the French nobles are getting together before the battle. And the Grand Pré says to the other French nobles, "Why do you stay so long, my lords of France? Yond island carrions, desperate of their bones, ill-favouredly become the morning field. Their ragged curtains poorly are let loose, and our air shakes them, passing scornfully. Big Mars seems bankrupt in their beggared host, and faintly through a rusty beaver peeps. The horsemen sit like fixed candlesticks, with torch staves in their hands, and their poor jades lob down their heads, dropping the hides and hips, the gum down roping from their pale dead eyes, and in their pale dull mouths the gimmeled bit lies foul with chawed grass, still and motionless. And their executors, the knavish crows, fly o'er them, all impatient for their hour. Description cannot suit itself in words to demonstrate the life of such a battle, in life so lifeless as it shows itself." So that was a description of the English army. And then the Battle of Agincourt takes place. And then at the end, the French are defeated, and the king says, "Now, herald, are the dead numbered?" And the herald gives him a note. "This note doth tell me of 10,000 French that in the field lie slain." Where is the number of our English dead? Edward, the Duke of York, the Earl of Suffolk, Sir Richard Ketley, Davy Gam, Esquire, none else of name, and of all other men, but 25? Oh God, thy arm was here. Come, go we in procession to the village. Let there be sung Don Nobis and Te Deum, the dead with charity enclosed in clay, and then to Calais, and to England then, where ne'er from France arrived more happy men. So again, he often finishes with a rhyming couplet. But I'd like to read to you the last bit of the chorus, which people never hear normally. It's cut. Now this is interesting. Thus far, with rough and all unable pen, our bending author has pursued the story in little room confining mighty men, mangling by starts the full course of their glory. Small time, but in that small most greatly lived the Star of England. Fortune made his sword, by which the world's best garden he achieved, and of it left his son, imperial lord Henry VI, in infant bands crowned king of France and England. Did this king succeed, whose state so many had the managing that they lost France and made his England bleed, which oft our stage hath shown, and for their sake in your fair minds let this acceptance take.
You know, as far as directing Shakespeare is concerned, if you can have visual stuff that works and it doesn't interfere with the text and the text is predominant, but it's perfectly possible to create a wonderful thing of Shakespeare on a bare stage, which is what was originally happening in his day. And so when I direct Shakespeare, I always try to have the absolute minimum of scenery and minimum of visual stuff and concentrate on what happens through the text. And certainly that's my approach. I feel that if you can get in touch with the language, if you can convey the images in the language to the audience by making them understand what the images are, then the audience will do its work. But if you don't give them the images from the text, then they got nothing to go on. So very often the audience doesn't expect to understand most of what is being said, and they should. For example, well, I'll give you an example. A sonnet of Shakespeare is 14 lines, and what's important is not the individual words, but the phrasing. And if you can deal with the phrasing properly, then I think the meaning of the sonnet will come across. For instance, one of my favorites is, when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy, contented least. Yet, in these thoughts, myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my thoughts, like to the break of day, with the lark arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. Now I messed up some of that text, but I kept the rhythm going, which is important. You know, I mean, there was some inaccuracy there, which I was aware of as I was doing it, but somehow if you find other words that keep the rhythm going, it still works, I hope. Yeah.